Well, welcome. Thank you all for being here this afternoon to talk about a very important topic. I'm Teresa Clarke, and I am the chairman of Africa.com. Having worked in the digital space over the last couple of decades, at a time when digital was everything and manufacturing seemed to be yesterday's news, where we are today shows us how history repeats itself. We're back at a place where manufacturing has become critical to every element of our economies and to our societies. Here today we have a fantastic panel to talk about the return of manufacturing. Just today, interestingly, The Economist put out an interesting study, a survey that said that more than twice as many companies in 2022 decided to bring their manufacturing back closer to home than in 2021. And that 96% of all companies surveyed said that they are thinking about making changes to their supply chain. Manufacturing after the pandemic is a completely different animal. And here today we have a fantastic group of people to look at this from the public sector, from the private sector, from leading manufacturers, and from government. So let me tell you a few housekeeping things before we get started. The first thing I'd like to do is mention that this piece of work is part of an ongoing initiative of the World Economic Forum. This session is part of the World Economic Forum's platform for shaping the future of advanced manufacturing and value chains, and the community has identified these priorities for this work: technology and innovation, resilient value chains, sustainable production, workforce engagement. Outcomes from this session will inform the platform strategy for the year ahead. And at the very end of this session, we're going to hear from someone who is leading this work on behalf of WEF. Let's talk about our objective for today. Our objective is to explore what the key challenges and opportunities for the industrial sector in the years ahead are, and what strategic priorities and partnerships should guide the work of the global manufacturing community. We would like to also mention that if you are following us on social, we would like you to use the hashtag WEF23, hashtag WEF23. And with that, let me say a couple of more words, and then I will introduce our esteemed panelists. Manufacturing and supply chains matter. They are the beating heart and blood of industrial society, so we need them healthy and resilient to tackle the challenges we face today, including poverty, the climate crisis, and current geopolitical tensions. In this new context, national, international, and public-private cooperation remain critical for industrial operations to be transformed in a responsible way, unlocking new value for companies, for workers, society, and for the environment. So, with that, let me introduce our panelists. We have His Excellency, Mr. Bandar Alkhorayef, Minister of Industry and Mineral Resources of Saudi Arabia, the Honorable Gretchen Whitmer, Governor of the State of Michigan, Roland Busch, the President and Chief Executive Officer of Siemens, Germany, and a member of the International Business Council, Jacqueline Poh, who is the Managing Director of the Singapore Economic Development Board, and Michel Doukeris, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Anheuser-Busch InBev USA. So thank you all very much for being here. Why don't we start with you, Your Excellency, if that's okay? Can you give us some context about how the world of manufacturing is shaping up today in your world, and what the main challenges and opportunities are that leaders such as yourself and leaders of countries should be thinking about from the manufacturing sector?
Thank you, and thank you for having me. Well, maybe we are quite positioned to talk about this because we just launched our industrial strategy just October of last year. This strategy is aimed to have a combination of results. One, aiming for high targets when it comes to contribution of GDP from manufacturing, to the number of investments, the number of employments that it will bring. But on the other hand, what is most important in this strategy is taking our industrial base from where it is today, which was built in 50 years, into the next level, where we will see more complexity, more advanced products, where we will be able to utilize the natural resources that we have, be it in oil and gas or minerals, to a more advanced product, adding value within the country. And also, the strategy aims to create or allow Saudi Arabia to be a hub for manufacturing for different global players. We understand that the disruption that has happened in the last few years is creating challenges, but also opportunities for countries like Saudi Arabia, with our great location, access to different markets, with our great also minerals and petrochemicals, with our great assets and most important asset, which is our people and talent, to be a serious player for attracting investments in manufacturing. So I think the most important thing for investors is to understand the intention. So the strategy is aiming to have the clarity, what is the country is trying to do, and how is it intending to do it. So we are betting on technology. We believe that technology will allow us to leapfrog for the future. So advanced manufacturing is key, AI, 3D printing, and so on. This will also allow us to create the right jobs for the future, the right jobs that we would like to see for our children and their children. This is for us an important piece of our Vision 2030 and how it will diversify our economy.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That's very interesting news. And I think that it would be really interesting to hear now from the governor, who comes from a place that is known for manufacturing historically, going from a place where manufacturing is new to a place that had its whole history based on manufacturing.
All the way from the other side of the world, we're doing some incredible advanced manufacturing as well in Michigan. It's an exciting time to be in Michigan. It is in our DNA. We boast, as we talk about natural resources, the manufacturing talent in Michigan, and 20% of the world's fresh water is in and around the state of Michigan, which gives us an incredible strength as we look at the future of manufacturing. But I do think government has an important role to play. I think that with the CHIPS Act and the IRA getting passed, we're going to see onshoring of manufacturing from the whole value chain. And we are doing a lot of that already in Michigan, from chips and semiconductors, all the way to batteries, to ultimately recycling, which is something that all of us are going to have to make sure that we are pushing industry to achieve these goals. I'm proud to be here with a battery company that I didn't realize was attending until I ran into my friend Deanna out in the hallway. They're a unicorn company. They're building the long-range batteries, our next energy, right in Michigan, one of many companies that is investing in Michigan, and we're poised to lead as we look to electrification in all things, whether it's maritime, aerospace, or traditional mobility.
Fantastic. And now we're going to come to you, Roland Busch. I think that having the opportunity to have someone who does manufacturing at your level, we all look to the work that you do as a standard setter for the globe from a manufacturing standpoint. Tell us, what has to change in terms of a mindset as we look at manufacturing going forward? It's different than it was before.
Yeah, indeed. And in order to answer that question, you have to ask, what did get us where we are today?
Yes.
And I mean, the paradigm which was bringing us to the world which we know, at least pre-COVID, was number one, optimizing on low labor cost. We didn't talk about scarcity of resources, so smart. We didn't take care too much about CO2 footprint. And geopolitical tension was not also on the topic. So then COVID came. And we saw that an optimization of this supply chain, polishing the asymptote, so to speak, that means, and I mean, you know it from automotive, just in time, just in sequence. If you have any disruption, then you have a problem. That doesn't do the trick anymore. So what happens now? And one more thing, the whole thing was only a one-way manufacturing. So you take resources out of the globe and then you produce something and you sell it. Circularity, so running the whole thing reverse, was never meant to be part of the design, but we have to have that. So what's happening now? We have a couple of topics. We saw how vulnerable we are. COVID told us, including a blockage of the Suez Canal and so on. We know that low labor is maybe not the point anymore. We want to have a higher resilience. We want to design for a low carbon footprint. We want to reuse our resources in a better way. So this whole thing is now just crying for a new way how to manufacture. If you talk about return of manufacturing, it's not the same manufacturing which we went somewhere, which you got back. It will be new one. So whatever we are talking, when we talk about a greenfield manufacturing, you should not settle for less than taking the latest technologies, building a digital twin of what you want to produce, a digital twin of how you produce it, and then build it, get it right the first time, and then use your twin in the operational space to optimize it again and again.
And for people who don't know what that means, just explain digital twin a little bit more.
So I think it's best explained, it's not just that you get a visual of what you built. I mean, that's easy. Each CAD system can do that. When you talk about digital twin, it means also that you see the physical behavior of it, when you shake it, when you heat it, what happens to it, including all the parts which you are building in. So everything has to be in there. Not before that you talk about digital twin. Give you one example. When you just animate something, like the gaming industry does, a robot, for example, it can move as fast as you want. The real version, if you move it too fast, it starts swinging. You don't want to have that. So you have to build that into that one. But once you get it right, then you have a real image of the real world, which you can simulate and optimize. And this drives productivity. We just talked about it before for food and beverage, for example. You can increase your productivity by 20 to 30%. Your productivity can increase. You're reducing your CO2 footprint if you do it right. So a lot of benefits. And that makes a big difference. If you get manufacturing back, is an opportunity, because more of that is greenfield, and then you really can use the latest technologies.
Fantastic, thank you. We're going to move to you, Jacqueline. You sit with the Singapore Economic Development Board, and so you think about manufacturing from a very broad perspective like our first two speakers did. Talk to us about the role you see manufacturing playing in terms of the well-being of your economy.
Thank you very much. First of all, I think it may surprise many of you to know that Singapore is a manufacturing nation. I get this element of surprise because most people think that Singapore is a financial services hub or a tourism hub. But in fact, manufacturing, particularly advanced manufacturing, makes up 22% of Singapore's GDP. Financial services only makes up 15% and tourism 3%. So actually, Singapore is a manufacturing nation, a bit like Michigan. The reason why you may think that Singapore is not a manufacturing nation is because we are small and that we don't have many people. Only 64 square kilometers, and we have maybe a population of about 5+ million people. The kind of manufacturing we've been doing for many decades now is very high-tech, highly automated, has a small footprint in terms of labor, and we are aiming for it to have a small footprint in terms of carbon. So for us, manufacturing is not about returning. It never went away, and it's still a very important part of our economy. That's the role that it plays in the Singapore economy, because manufacturing is a very stable, very investment intensive, but provides a kind of predictability and stability in terms of the jobs that it creates. Compared to many of the services sectors in many countries, it tends to be less volatile. And it also provides a strong basis of engineering talent that is very useful in times when you need to make things. So engineering really promotes a kind of culture in a place that makes things. Some of you may wonder what kind of manufacturing Singapore does. There's a lot of semiconductor, there's a lot of biopharma, there's a lot of energy and chemicals, and there's a lot of aerospace.
Thank you. Michel, we're coming to you now. As the head of Anheuser-Busch in the US, one of the things we've been talking a lot about as far as manufacturing is concerned is bringing manufacturing back home. Now, localized manufacturing is something that your industry has done historically. Can you talk to us a little bit about localized manufacturing and where you see that headed?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me here. And we operate a global company, and we are present in more than 50 countries. So we often say internally in the company that we don't have beer designed in one place and produced in other. Beer is very local, as it is the supply chain for beer. So in this case, we are not returning. We are always there, part of the communities, and very local and center to the activity. When you think about jobs creation, so Oxford released last year a study, and in the beer sector, from farming to producing to distributing, retailing, 1 out of 110 jobs in the countries globally. If you go for developing countries, can be 1 out of 80 jobs. And we think that's going to be very interesting to see this return of manufacturing, because I think we will have new technology, gains of productivity, we will be able to leverage data big time. And I think that one important point is understanding what's going to come back to where and at what pace, so we can avoid disruptions. Things cannot just like move overnight from one place to the other. We saw during COVID the size of the disruptions that we saw in aluminum, in grains, in some of the very important commodities. So I think that a little bit of coordination, planning, while shorting things will be very, very relevant.
Very good. And Roland, can we come back to you? Because when we think about the beer industry, we think about it as localized. When we think about Siemens, I don't know really how you work, but we think about it centralized and you exporting things to every part of the world. Can you talk a little bit about how you see the localized nature of manufacturing as we go forward?
Actually, we are present in 190 countries in the world, and for most of them for more than 100 years. So we are enabling. Actually, we are more tier one. We're enabling manufacturing when it comes back. So what we see is, as I said before, the drivers for bringing this back are more dimensional. But the point is, it's not just optimizing on low labor anymore. That's a different story. And this is good news maybe for countries which are not sitting on low labor cost. And by the way, talking about labor, it's anyhow a shortage because we're living in aging societies. And therefore, if you talk about currently in the market, it's hard to get people. So this is a problem. So what happens is now, we talk about, and we talked about using data, is it's not just creating data. I think we have massive amount of data. It's about combining the real and the digital worlds. That means you're sitting on data, you're simulating, but you build it then. And this is the element which has to come in, which needs vertical or market competence. You have to understand how to make beer, how to build a car, how to assemble a car, how to build batteries. And not before you understand it, then you can interpret the data you're creating. So, and this is for me the picture of the future of when manufacturing comes back. What you can do is that you use the technology and you have a chance to limit the amount of resources you need. You don't waste resources. You, as I said before, you can design it in a way that you will be able to recycle resources. You talked about battery manufacturing. Lithium, will not we have enough lithium if you don't recycle it at a certain point in time? No way. So you have to build it from the very first instance into your product to recycle it, which is, by the way, talking about a return of manufacturing, we will see a completely new market, which is the recycling market and the circularity market, which will be massive, and for good reasons, because we cannot dig all these resources out of the earth again and again. It's just too much. And at the same time, we have to reduce our CO2 footprint. So again, it's for me, it's more opportunities in order to still maintain the growth of economies while using less resources.
Very good. Well, Governor Whitmer, let's come back to you. One of the things that we've also seen change over the last couple of years, not only have supply chains been disrupted, but there's been a new emphasis on ESG, on people, on putting people first. And so from your position as the governor of a state that does a lot of manufacturing, how do you think about and how do you advise the companies in your state, and what sort of policies do you think about as a governor in terms of putting people first as we go back to manufacturing?
Well, I think it's important that we all have an eye toward equitable growth, and we know that as we do advanced manufacturing, we've got a really unique partnership in Michigan. WEF has their first U.S. Center for Advanced Manufacturing is in Troy, Michigan. We're very excited about that collaboration because as we solve for a variety of looming issues. I think ensuring that we've got the workforce that is prepared, but also that you can make a really good living in these advanced manufacturing jobs, and that every person can find a path into this work. So it starts from the beginning of life throughout, and that's why I think that these partnerships and collaborations are really important. We cannot assume that industry alone will address this. I think government has a very important role, and these opportunities are ways to bring people prosperity and create individual integrity in work. And that's what manufacturing's always been in Michigan. Created the middle class, but we can't assume that that will always be the case, and that's why I think this work that we're doing together is so important.
Very good. And Your Excellency, can you talk a little bit about this same topic, putting people first as you move into your new manufacturing agenda?
Sure. I think it's, today, when we look at talent acquisition is key for in any sector. And by far, when we look at in the industrial sector, it's a sector where it needs to shape up to be able to acquire the right talent for the future. My view and our view in Saudi Arabia is the government should be an enabler. Today, more than ever before, I think governments have a key role in helping investors, helping the manufacturing sector to operate in a manner that they can continue producing and also growing. So three things are key. One is regulation, having the right regulatory framework that is able to allow investment to come and flow, but also allow the different stakeholders to be able to have equal opportunities. Secondly, infrastructure. Infrastructure is key to, especially now, I'm not talking about the basic infrastructure, I'm talking about connectivity. In order for us to create the kind of factories of the future where we will be able to attract the right talent, we need connectivity, for example, as key enabler for enabling the sector to connect. I used to be a businessman. I used to actually sell industrial equipment. And in the past, you can actually invest in an equipment and get the benefit of the equipment regardless of the ecosystem around you, because the basic output is being created within the plant. Now, suddenly, with advanced manufacturing, with Industry 4.0, we're talking about getting everyone connected. How can I connect the plant to the suppliers, to the mine, to the logistics, and so on? And that takes a lot of efforts to be able to do so, and therefore governments have a key role. And finally, governments also have a role in developing the human capital required for the sector. It's a two-way street. We cannot expect investors to come and put their investments in the country without really having the ability to see that the pipeline of creating the right human capital is actually there, from education, from training, from skilling and reskilling, and so on. So it's a combination of efforts. I mean, today our collaboration with the World Economic Forum on the platform is actually key to help our industrial sector move to the next level with an ambition of moving 4,000 factories to what we call factories of the future.
Will you tell us a little bit more about the work that you're doing in terms of training and education?
Yeah, we have one of the largest programs in the Vision 2030 is the Human Capital Program. This is created to ensure that education, training, and skilling and reskilling is designed to fit with all of the sectors that are intended to grow in our economy. This is one of the largest programs. It's actually headed by His Royal Highness himself, and addresses all the whole journey of an individual from an early age to after even retirement. And the ambition is to create what we call a global citizen. where our people can not only have opportunities in Saudi Arabia, but they can be geared to work anywhere else.
Fantastic. So one of the buzzwords of WEF 23 when we leave will have been polycrisis, dealing with multiple challenges simultaneously. Jacqueline, I'm going to throw a difficult one at you. One of the crises that we're dealing with while we think about the return of manufacturing is trying to achieve net zero, trying to deal with the climate crisis. Can you talk a little bit about how governments can look towards achieving their short-term objectives in bringing back manufacturing, but at the same time advancing their long-term objectives around sustainability and net zero targets?
Yes, thanks. I think the key things that we have to remember about what has really changed about manufacturing, especially in the decades that Singapore has done it, is now manufacturing is A, more digital, B, it has to be more resilient in terms of diversification of sources and knowing where that comes from and ensuring that you're in a site that works all the time to deliver the product. And C, the third point, is that it has to be green. Industry is one of the most difficult sectors to abate. It's also one of the key elements of decarbonization for any economy. So I think that Singapore, like many countries, is working to figure out how we can actually decarbonize our manufacturing sector. And for us, as an alternative energy constrained economy, that's a very, very interesting challenge to be posed. So there are many elements of this that are readily implementable in the near term. Energy efficiency is definitely one. And in certain sectors, for example, in foundries, semiconductors, putting in place things like scrubbers is another. But many of the solutions are far longer term and require a lot of research and development, partnerships with other parts of the green economy and climate tech to actually realize. Many parts of industry are looking at carbon capture, utilization, and storage. They're looking at what hydrogen and green hydrogen can do to help decarbonize manufacturing. And I think Singapore, like many countries, is going to work closely together with industry to try and make the investments required to make that a reality. And alongside with that, I think other elements of renewable energy sources, low carbon energy sources are actually going to be quite critical.
Michel, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're doing at Anheuser-Busch with respect to achieving net zero?
Yeah, in beer, you have this carbon footprint and energy footprint that's not intensive as in other industries. And we have our long-term goals, as everybody have, and we've been investing heavily to decarbonize, to use renewable energy, especially to protect water, watersheds, and in recycling. But we also like to think about how can we have a bigger contribution around some other big problems that we are facing. And in talking about the manufacture of the future, I think that there are ways for you to think about how you bring back something that you already produced somewhere and now you're going to produce closer to you. But there is ways for you to think how can you reinvent and reimagine what you can do. And one of the big issues that we all face is food security. And we all know how big is the carbon footprint of producing food. So we've been investing heavily in ABI in developing precision fermentation. So we happen to be the owners of the largest bench of yeast globally. And yeast is a very productive organism. And we've been investing for some years already, and we've been producing protein, for example, egg protein or milk protein out of our fermentation and our yeast bench that we have. And because we have very large scale manufacturing and we are used to produce at scale fermented beverages, we've been using our ability to leverage downstream processes so we can recreate and reimagine, for example, what food systems and ingredients can be. And if you can then create at scale food factories using the yeast that we use to brew beer, then you can localize a lot of manufacture, a lot of food systems, but different from the way that you have today, which is more intensive, use more land, depends and relies on transportation across the globe, and is very hard to localize because you cannot produce all the wheat that you produce in Ukraine, in the US or in Japan or here in other countries in Europe. But you can, with a much better footprint, using precise fermentation, brew the food and the food ingredients that you need at a localized place. We've been also investing in upcycling. So we use a lot of barley, and people usually don't know that, but barley is a grain that has starch, the carbohydrate, has protein, and has fiber. Because the yeast is very efficient, the yeast takes all the starch from the grain, but leaves behind all the protein and all the fiber. Today, through technology, we can do the separation of the protein and the fiber, and you can have a very rich protein. Upcycling barley, this barley was already seeded, harvested, transported, brewed and used in our industry, and by upcycling this barley, we can now sell as an ingredient pure protein for other companies to use. And it's a much more efficient way for you to decarbonize and to generate value in the supply chain. So we've been stretching the way that we think about what we can do with the assets that we own and with the resources that we already use as a company.
Wonderful. Well, we have time for questions from the audience. Are there any questions that the audience would like to address to our esteemed panelists? Yes, we have a question here.
Hello, the question is for Governor Whitmer. Hi, I'm Annette Clayton from Schneider Electric. I'm the competitor of the gentleman to your left. Here to woo the governor. Actually, my question is, and by the way, our company was founded, Square D was founded in the great state of Michigan, and I'm from originally the automotive industry, so the great state of Michigan. But my question is really around labor, because it's really the challenge. We've been ramping up new production, and as we look at labor statistics, and what are some of the creative ways that maybe you and your other panelists are driving the solution to the labor shortage?
So I appreciate the question, and I'm grateful for your background that you shared with us. One of the things that I think is really important, and a lot of people don't appreciate about Michigan right now, is we've got the #1 economy for clean energy jobs in the country. We're seeing this incredible growth, and as we look at the transition of advanced manufacturing, upskilling the current population so that as companies get leaner and more technological, that there's opportunity for people who've done the traditional mobility work to have jobs in these advanced, with advanced set of skills. Drawing people into manufacturing, I think that there still is an outdated assumption about what manufacturing means, that it's dirty and it's physical and in a way that isn't really reflective of how things work nowadays. And so really kind of working to reimagine how we communicate where the paths are to opportunity in this space. We've done ourselves, I think, a disservice in the United States. I can't speak beyond our borders, but with a focus only on degree pathways into prosperity and not discouraging inadvertently paths into the trades where you can make a really great living and be your own boss in a lot of respects, and make a healthy salary to raise a family. And that's really what it's all about at the end of the day. So we're working from early education throughout high school and leveling barriers, the financial barriers that keeps people from pursuing these skills. I've spent the last couple of days in Norway and here in Switzerland, and the financial barrier that no one confronts here into skills and the high esteem with which people hold manufacturing jobs is something that I envy, and that we are working diligently to to kind of redefine and level those barriers that keep people from pursuing these great opportunities. But it is work that is happening all across the country. It is an issue not unique to one state or another, or perhaps one country or another, but this is how we are attacking it and working with our manufacturing partners to get people into, at a young age, to see that there's really exciting high-tech work that's happening that is in manufacturing that they didn't assume would be.
Any more questions? Yes, the gentleman here. Please wait until you get the microphone, and please stand up.
Yeah, good evening. Abdullah Al-Zamel, Chairman of Zamel Industrial, Saudi Arabia. In order for return manufacturing to succeed, you need the globe as a market. I haven't heard any of the panels talk about the protectionist policies that some governments are taking and some of the deglobalization and inward-looking policies that we've seen lately. How, especially the multinationals, how are you dealing with that? Thank you.
Roland, you want to start?
Yeah, that's a topic. And actually, I do not believe that we are deglobalizing. I think we are ending up in an even more globalized world. But the trading streams are not that, let's say, big anymore. They diversify. That's the hope. And that's an opportunity as well. Actually, if you reallocate manufacturing from, let's say, take China as an example, which is the manufacturing bench, and you bring it back, there are a couple of more dimensions, and one of them is that a place where I can really then also export, where I've free trade agreements with other countries? I have to look into that one too, because that makes a big difference. Because if you relocate, obviously you want to serve the local market, and you bring your manufacturing as close as possible to your own market, onshoring or nearshoring. But then, you, of course, you want to leverage that opportunities at the same time. You have to watch closely where do you do that. For me, ASEAN is a good example. I mean, we talked about it when I was in Singapore. ASEAN has a free trade agreement with China, and all within ASEAN countries. They are the growth market. So it's worthwhile looking into that country where you put your manufacturing. The other dimension is definitely labor. I do believe this is a big topic, maybe one of the biggest ones. We have to invest more and more in education and training. And it's not as it used to be. When I started studying, I mean, you learn something and you deploy it for the rest of your working career. That doesn't work anymore. Maybe you have to relearn and retrain yourself 10 times in your career. And that's another element which we have to take in mind. And the third one is, we didn't talk about that as well, it's really about the supply base, because very often the way how we are looking at manufacturing is that you have a manufacturing side and you have a supply base around you, and if you don't pull that along with you, or you don't have a chance to build it up as well, it's another problem. So considering that, I do believe it's more opportunities, because you will have a natural hatching. If you manufacture local for local, you're reducing your dependency on logistics and at the same time. But of course, you want to export as well, which is another element which you have to have in mind.
Yeah, I think that the question is a very good one, because at the end of the day, there is the opportunity and the cost of you bringing back this manufacturer to a local country. The opportunity is really in productivity, is in achieving some of the goals that we've been talking about here in terms of sustainability. But of course, this will come with a cost, because it's a new footprint, it's new technology. You need to find ways to create the scale that sometimes you don't have in these places. And if you have tariffs, if you have too many border protections, you end up passing on too much cost as inflation to final consumers, because it will be very difficult to de-optimize the system that you have today that was very helpful for inflation in the last 10, 20 years, and take this to a new place that is less optimized at the same cost, right? So this process will create some inflation no matter what in the short term. And if everything plays well in terms of productivity, being closer to your consumer, then long term it might be deflationary. But I think that governments will need to work on policy, we need to work on infrastructure, we need to work in human capital, and it will need to work in incentives to localize this production and to be efficient at the end of the day. Is it a good process? I think that's going to be great, because the more things you can have close to you, almost like a hedge, right, to avoid disruptions in the supply chain, to stimulate the local economies, and to have more production near shore, I think that the more efficient the societies will be. But you cannot do this with tariffs, with borders, with protectionism in each and every country, because then you're going to end up being suboptimal and much more expensive than you are today.
Excellent. Well, I think you all know that we'd like to ask you, excuse me, to close with a call to action. Can you please give us one specific action that you want this community to take away? And I remind you, as you make your comments, that this is part of a broader initiative of the World Economic Forum. We're not just a panel discussion where we start and end this conversation today. It's part of ongoing work. So as you guide that work going forward, what is your one call to action? And we will start with you, Your Excellency.
Okay. I think it's important to remember that manufacturing, at the end of the day, is investment. And any investment, any investor today look for three things. They look for making money, they want growth, and they want to de-risk. So it's very important to understand the investor, create the environment that allows for this investment to continue coming. So predictability is key. Also, ensuring there is an ecosystem that allows for the growth, for the competitiveness to be always there. So, for example, RDI is key to ensure that there's always continuation of research, development, and innovation.
Very good. Thank you, Governor.
My call to action is more of an invitation, and that is to come to Michigan. There's so much exciting work that is happening in the state of Michigan. Phenomenal research universities, high quality of life, low cost of living, and we really are changing the future of mobility in all ways possible, including long-range batteries to chips to clean energy, and we're always looking for great partners.
Excellent. Roland?
Actually, I would say there are three things that need to be done. I do believe technology is an answer to the challenges which we have. So automate and digitalize as fast as possible and decarbonize. Number two is watch out for your people, education and training. I think you have to spend and prepare a lot of money and invest in that. It's worthwhile doing that. And the last one is, we didn't talk about that, but I do believe the whole thing works only if you have a completely different way of collaborating, building ecosystems. I do believe these three elements, if they come together, we'll make it.
Excellent. Jacqueline?
The thought I'd like to leave you with is that as much as we want to think about nearshoring for resilience, and I think many companies are doing that, no country and no region is entirely self-sufficient. And it would be a mistake to forget the entirety of the dependencies in terms of raw materials, in terms of skills, in terms of comparative advantage that exists by having a manufacturing supply chain that does take into account the benefits of making things in more than one country, rather than trying to do everything in one place. So it is still very important to think about where globalization fits in the future of manufacturing.
Michel?
So I think that my call to action is, when we think and imagine this future of manufacture, we don't think about recreating what we do in one place to a different place. We actually think and reimagine how we call at ABI, how to create a future with more cheers, where you really do better, where you really do a more sustainable end-to-end manufacture, and you really create the space to be more productive and more collaborative.
Excellent. Well, just summarize very briefly what we've heard from this panel, and then we're going to have some closing remarks from Francisco Betti. I think that what we've heard today is that there's an inherent contradiction in what we're talking about with respect to the return to manufacturing. On the one hand, we see there's greater protectionism, we know that, but at the same time, we understand that supply chains require globalization. So it's a very delicate dance that has to be done in order to achieve these dual objectives. I think we've also heard how complicated it is, in that it really requires multiple stakeholders to come together. And that's one of the reasons why we have made this panel up of representatives from government and those from private sector. The two have to work hand in hand in order to achieve the objectives. And I think the third comment that we have is also around labor. That is something that has come up over and over again in these conversations. One of the things we know about labor, about manufacturing, is that it requires labor. It may not be your father's manufacturing, as the governor said. It may not be dirty, but it still requires people, no matter how sophisticated you might be doing in Singapore and Michigan and Saudi Arabia, you still require people. And so making sure that people are trained and educated in order to align with those opportunities is essential and one way that government can contribute. So with that, I'd like to invite Francisco to come up and talk a little bit more about the initiative that WEF is doing in this space. Francisco? Here you are. I'm looking in the wrong direction.
Thank you, Teresa, very much for the great moderation. Maybe we are on time, so two brief comments. One, good news. This is not a one-off conversation, but it's part of our ongoing work at the Forum on the Future of Advanced Manufacturing and Value Chains, and we invite you all to stay engaged. We will take all the amazing insights that came out of the conversation this evening to inform our agenda for 2023. The second comment is that manufacturing is back on top of the global agenda. I think the fact that we are having this conversation in Davos is a demonstration of that, and that's probably great news. It comes both with opportunities, as many of you mentioned, but also with the responsibility, and the responsibility is to make sure that we shape a future of manufacturing that works for all. What I mean with that is working, of course, for companies, workers, society, the environment, OEMs, SMEs, and develop and emerging economies. With that, let me thank you all for following us today and for being here. Teresa, thank you for the amazing moderation, and thank you to our distinguished panelists for the great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.